One way that we communicate optimization problems from person to person is through something I call sets, indices, and summations. So here's a problem that's called the transportation problem. We have a bunch of warehouses, could just be two, could be thousands, and we have some retail locations, could just be three, could be thousands. Do you know how many retail locations there are for major chains, let's say in the United States? I've heard the biggest pizza places have like 8,000, 10,000 locations, and I think Subway has double that, for example. So, here it's a small example, but this can get pretty big. So we have to decide how much material should flow from warehouse 1 to retail location 1, warehouse 1 to retail location 2, etc. And we have a cost for each item of flow from warehouse 1 to retail location 1, etc. Each warehouse has a limit on how much stock it has available, and each retail location has a minimum amount of stuff that they need to get so they can satisfy demand. So the way we'll start formulating it is we'll declare some sets. We'll have a set of warehouses. You could number them 1 and 2, or you could give them particular city names, for example. There's no reason that these have to be numbers. We'll have a set of retail locations as well. And then we'll define some decision variables. The flow I comma j is the flow from warehouse I being an element of the warehouses, to retail location j being an element of the set of retail locations. And then we define some parameters. Notice we're not giving any actual numbers here, we're just giving names to places that numbers will go. How much stock is available at each warehouse, how much demand is there for each location, and what's the per unit cost for shipping from here to there. And then our objective function is to minimize total cost, which is a sum product, not a big surprise, over all pairs of source and destinations, warehouses and retail shops. Or you could say it's a double sum over all warehouses, and then for each warehouse over all retail locations that might get flow from that warehouse. So you could think of it either way, and sometimes this way is better, sometimes this way is better. In particular, if you had a list of all the possible routes, and maybe warehouses in some locations can't possibly ship to retail locations elsewhere, then your number of possible routes might be less than the number of total pairings, and so this would be a more efficient formulation, and we'll see something like that in just a minute. So then we have some constraints, right? And this gets a little interesting. We have a set of warehouse stock constraints. You can't take more stock out of a warehouse than it has. So what we're saying here is for each warehouse in the set of warehouses, the stock at that warehouse has to be bigger than the amount of flow you take out of that warehouse. So it's a careful use of indices here. We're saying sum up over all retail locations the flows from this warehouse, and as specified here. So that's all the outflow from a warehouse has to be less than the stock. We can do similarly for the retail shops. For each retail shop, we have a demand that is the sum of all flows from all the warehouses to this retail shop. So notice the I here is specified by this clause, the j is specified by this summation. Here it's the opposite, the I is specified by this summation, and the j, there's a j on both sides, and it's specified by this. The I is only on the side where the summation is handling that. And then all variables non-negative, not surprisingly. So this is an example of how we formulate things in with sets and indices and stuff. Here's an example of another problem, and this is just the formulation on Wikipedia. Again, one person communicating to another. And this is for facility location, where you haven't decided where to put your warehouses yet, but you have a list of candidate places, and you have to decide which of those warehouses to open. And once you open those, which warehouses ship what to which retail location. So it's kind of a bigger problem than the transportation problem. And you can see here it's formulated with sets and indices and location and summations and stuff. And here's a version without having to worry about the warehouse capacities. And we've got some kind of binary clamping going on here like we've talked about before.